Alrighty guys, so everything's cleaned up. Block's clean, parts are clean, and it's just about ready to be measured. I didn't film me cleaning all of this because it's a very tedious process and it takes a long time. And I didn't want to subject myself to having to film that, and I didn't want to have to put you guys through watching all of it. So I didn't film it. I will tell you what I did though. So the first thing I did was I took all of the parts that could be broken down into smaller parts and I broke them down. And then I threw everything into a parts washing solution. What I ended up using was a concentrated degreaser that I found at Harbor Freight. It's not usually what you would use. Usually what you would use is acetone or some kind of heavy solvent like I have here. So I didn't really have much hope for the degreaser because that's my experience is with the paint thinners. But I threw the parts in, left them in overnight, and in the morning all of the heavy grease and oil and baked on carbon deposits were fairly easy to remove with a parts washing brush and a scrubber. The only downside to it is that it'll leave a white residue on your parts after they're dry, so it's not really recommended. Acetone's cheaper anyway, so use acetone. After I was done doing that, I took some emery cloth and cleaned all of the machine surfaces on all of the parts. I just want to get rid of the discoloration and the rust that had gotten in from the power washing. So all of that stuff is clean in emery cloth, apart from 4 connecting rods that I just got kind of lazy about, and so I need to get to those eventually. So after that, I moved on to the block. Now, I cleaned the block with just some brake clean because all that was really on here was oil and coolant, and I didn't really need to scrub anything. So I just brake cleaned it. Used about 2 cans of brake clean, got all that stuff off. It ate at it and just dropped it right off the block, so it was really nice to use. It didn't get off anything that was baked onto the block. I had to go back around and clean that by hand, but it got most of it. So after that was done, after I cleaned the block, I rotated it over and started emery clothing the journals, the main journals. Now I'm probably using the term journal incorrectly. What I mean when I say journal, in the case of the block, is the bore in which your crankshaft or your camshaft will sit. But I also use it for the place of the camshaft or crankshaft that sits in the bore. For the crankshaft, you'll know which one I'm talking about because when it's the bore, I'll say main journal. When it's the crankshaft itself, I'll say the crank journal. For the camshaft, I use the same term interchangeably. I'll just say cam journal for either the camshaft itself or for the bore that it sits in. So I'm probably using it wrong, but that's how I understand the term to be used. So you're kind of stuck with that, sorry. But anyways, I emery clothed up the main journals, and they had the same issue as the parts did, some rust and some discoloration. And then I took the main caps and I bolted them on there. I'll go into a little bit more detail about what exactly I did with the main caps when I get to measuring. But yeah, so put the main caps on and then I rotated the engine over and started to work on the deck. So talking about the deck here brings up something else that I want to talk about, which is abrasives. Now, when you're talking about sandpaper or emery cloth and you're just kind of grouping them all together, it's an abrasive. If you try to use the term sandpaper when you're talking about emery cloth or vice versa, not only will you peeve some people off, but when you go to buy the stuff, they're not going to know what you're talking about. So the differences here are that sandpaper is an abrasive on literal paper, and it comes in larger sheets. It works with sanding tools, and it's kind of just a general purpose steel. They use it for body work, they use it for woodwork. I used it here on metal. So this is kind of your all-around go-to abrasive. This here is emery cloth. Now, emery cloth is an abrasive on cloth. It's a lot more durable than the sandpaper, and this is used for metal. So basically any kind of machining work you want done, any kind of mechanical work, any kind of engine work, this is what you would use. And that durability is the reason this is used on metal, because paper, if it's not on a tool, is liable to get shredded and stuff like that. This emery cloth won't do that. The thing about emery cloth is that it only really comes in strips. I've never seen it come in large sheets, so it's really hard to use with sanding tools. So that's the deal there. And speaking about sanding tools, I wanted to talk about the sanding block that I'm using here. Now, this is kind of an unconventional tool to use for engines, or at least I think it is, because I haven't really seen people use something like this on an engine. But I like using a sanding block for large flat surfaces like the deck for two reasons. First is comfort and ease of work, and the second part is that it'll give you a better result. So as far as comfort goes, this is a lot easier to use than just using bare hands or some kind of small piece of wood to do these surfaces, because you can put this whole thing in your palm, move it around, throw your body weight behind it, and it makes it a lot easier to do this, makes it a lot quicker. The other deal is that there is a lot of abrasive in contact with whatever surface you're using, so you're just going to get your work done even quicker because of that. Another cool thing about the block is that it doesn't round off these machined edges. Unless you're tilting it, it'll keep these nice and sharp. If you're using your hands or whatever, they like to conform to them and you're going to end up rounding them off. So the sanding block helps with that. So I used the sandpaper and the emery cloth to get the entire deck down to about as close as I was willing to go to just straight up metal. All this residue from the gasket that you see, it's not really important. There's really nothing there. You can't feel it. It's just color. So that's the deck. Deck's clean. Then I moved on to the cylinders. Now the cylinders I screwed up a few times. I had to hone them 3 times because the first time I did it, I forgot to clean this area above the ring ridge. It had a lot of baked on carbon deposits because it's exposed to the combustion chamber and my engine was burning oil, so it had burnt oil and it got down in between the piston and the cylinder wall and caked in there. So when I went to hone it, my hone picked up all that crap and just dispersed it throughout the entire cylinder. So I had to go back around and brake clean it, get all that stuff off, and then try it again. The second time I tried it, I found out that the drill I was using just wasn't going to cut it. So I stopped again and found a better drill, and it was a corded drill. It was more powerful, and so it could spin my honing tool a lot better. And that one did the trick. I made 9 passes in each cylinder, a pass being down and up. That's 1 pass. This is kind of the result. The little bit of rust in there is just from exposure to the atmosphere kind of deal. Humidity, basically. So the deal with honing is there are 2 types of honing tools that I know about. This is one. I don't know if it has a name. There wasn't a name on the packaging, but it consists of kind of a deal that fits into your drill bit, followed by a really flexible shaft here. This makes it so that you can kind of hold your drill off kilter while this is just still straight up and down in your bore. I don't really understand what this does, so I'm not going to try to explain it. And it's also made up of 3 spring-loaded arms with 3 large stones on pivots at the end of them. This tool will fit between a 2 and a 7-inch bore. I wouldn't go to those extremes just because you're probably going to have some trouble with contact at 7 inches, and you're going to need a really powerful drill to spin this thing in the bore at 2. So that's what this one is. I don't know the name of it, but this is the one that I used for it. The other type of honing tool is what I can only remember as being called a dingleball hone. Now, I'm calling it a dingleball hone because I was watching Motor Trend Channel's Roadkill, and one of the hosts of Roadkill, David Freiberger, calls it a dingleball hone. And the reason he calls it that is because it's made up of around 100 spherical stones, the same material here, on the end of wire branches connected to basically this same deal here with a longer shaft that the branches hang on to. It's in the shape of a cylinder. It's a little bit wider than the cylinder that you're trying to hone, and it's used in pretty much exactly the same way, apart from the whole spring loading deal. Now, the way you use these is you lube up your cylinders. You can also lube up the tool. I didn't. and then you put this sucker in your drill, you stick your tool in there, and you wind up your drill real quick, and you make a few passes. On an engine that's in fairly good shape, it might take 2-3 passes to get it done. On this one, there was a pretty heavy glaze on it, so I had to do 9 passes. Now, the glaze is just a term that my grandfather told me. I don't know if it's a technical term, but it's the one I'm using. And what it is a caramelish colored smooth surface to your cylinders. It's not a residue, it's just from your cylinder rings wearing at your cylinders and some discoloration from heat. And all you're doing with your hone is you're roughing up the surface and you're cleaning off that discoloration. So that's the deal with that. You can also use pretty much whatever you want for lubricants. I used a fairly heavy engine oil. But I've seen people use diesel or whatever, so you can, the whole range, thin to thick, doesn't really matter. It just kind of depends on how long you want to be at it doing it. So that's kind of honing, or at least my understanding of it. Oh, another thing is you'll hear people refer to the crosshatch of a cylinder. This kind of honing tool doesn't really give you that because it has these long stones in it, but the dingle ball hone, because it has many small stones, will give you a crosshatch. Which is basically an X pattern inside of your cylinder, and depending on how fast or slow you go, it'll look like this if you're going real slow, and it'll look like this if you're going real fast. And it's just from having many stones with different scratches kind of crossing up and down. And what you're looking for with the cylinders is not generally the crosshatch. People say, oh, do you got a crosshatch in it? Well, if you use a tool like this, you won't have one. What you're looking for is just kind of a brushed finish looking to it. So that's the deal there. So yeah, that's basically all I did for cleaning everything. It's all ready to be measured. So yeah, let's get to it.